Let's get into it. I am Cassandra Snow, they, them pronouns. I had such a beautiful introduction from Denise that I don't know if you need to know more, but I will say a little bit more just about my personal tarot practice and the way I use the cards. One of the reasons I love teaching tarot and believe that I'm a good person to teach tarot is because I really read eclectically. There are a lot of readers out there who will say, oh, I only read it for emotional purpose, or I only read it for spiritual purpose, or I only use it for present day, or I only look at the future with it. And I do all of that. And I'm super well versed in doing all of that. And I want to emphasize tonight, as you're learning as you go, you can absolutely do any of that or something totally different or some of it. And you can also do all of it too. I will say when I started, I primarily looked at it as a way to look at patterns and make connections, and everything else kind of grew from there. And I also have always looked at the art, which we're going to do in just a moment, and I'll talk more about that when it's time. And so it's okay to kind of start with, well, I really liked this thing that we talked about, so I'll start getting really strong there and then move on. So that is where I'm coming from there. In my life, as well as in my practice, and especially when I am teaching people who want to learn tarot, I really believe in generosity and compassion and fun in what we're doing. Tarot originally started as a series of paintings, and then it went from that to a game. We'll talk a little bit more about the sort of styles or school of tarot in just a moment, but I say that just to say, for me, it really does mean that the crux of tarot is in learning to really dissect and look at and learn from the images in front of you. And also, like, games are supposed to be fun. So even when you're asking the tarot about very serious things, I think the cards do have a sense of humor and a levity that I like for people to be able to tap into. And certainly some cards more so than others. So that's a little bit more about me. I also firmly believe that this tool can be accessible without being fluffy. I trust you all to dig as deep as you want to dig and then no further in public. It's kind of up to you what that well is. Yeah, before I get too much further into it, let's get centered. Let's take a moment. I was just kind of looking at my syllabus to make sure this is the order I wanted to do. But let's take a moment to really come into this space. I know when we're taking a class this late in the evening, a workshop, it can be difficult to really be here and present in this moment. So what I like to do is I will talk about breath and breathing deeply. I myself have some autoimmune stuff with breathing, so I can't always do it. I know that it's not always possible for everyone. So if I say anything about breathing deeply, you can instead just focus on your breath. Just pay attention to what it's doing. And then similar to if there is any kind of accessibility with shutting your eyes, or if you just had a really long day and think if you shut your eyes, you might fall asleep. You don't have to do that either. You can just kind of focus on something, kind of like rest your eyes as much as you can. So all of that said, let's get centered. If able, close your eyes and take just a couple of deep breaths, however deep you can do. And when we say deep, we do mean in as much as you can. Let it rest for a couple of seconds and then breathe out slowly. So I'm going to do that as well and then kind of walk you where else to go. And then as you're breathing deep or just focusing on your breathing, continue to focus on it. But then kind of tune into your body. Where is somewhere on your body that is really comfortable? For me right now, it's actually around my abdomen. So I'm going to take that comfort and imagine sort of like a glowing ball of energy. And as I breathe, that ball is going to expand, and you're going to get not necessarily the ball growing, but like a glow growing all over your abdomen, around your back. you know, and for you, it starts wherever it is, and then it goes out and kind of through. Then picture it just kind of spreading up, down throughout your body. And so that's the part where we're tuning into ourselves, where we're tuning into maybe what our mind or our heart or our spirit has to say today as we work. But it's also really important to be grounded when you read. So please also, wherever your feet are, whether they're on the floor or whether you're sitting crisscross applesauce and they're on your shins, you know, really feel that connection. Feel what your feet are hitting and kind of connect that. What is underneath that? For me, I'm on the floor. Below that, just think about how that is connected to the apartment below me. Below that is like dirt and, well, there's a basement and then dirt and some other stuff. So just kind of picture where that connection goes. And remember, if at all tonight you get confused or you feel overwhelmed, tune back into this feeling of being grounded. So I'm going to take a sip of water and give everyone a moment to do that. And then I'm going to walk us back from 10. When I get to 1, open your eyes and we will jump into it. So starting at 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So welcome. We already talked a little bit about the super brief history of tarot. I don't like going into that too much because most people are here because they want to learn how to do it. But I do think it's important to know where it came from. And one of the things I will say is that it really got canonized as tarot in 14th and 15th century Italy, arguably France as well, after being inspired by these paintings in this museum to create actual pieces, like a full deck. It was also deeply inspired by playing cards, and a lot of people feel like if you know how to read tarot, you can very easily figure out how to read standard playing cards as well. So that's kind of cool. And then from there, people did and do read with the cards that were the game. That was formed. You might recognize it as Tarot de Marseille. We'll talk a little bit more about that type now. And then it was picked up in sort of the early 1900s by an occult group called the Golden Dawn, and they really created the deck that would sort of spark a whole, you know, community and history and everything that we have now. That deck is the Rider-Waite, also called the Rider-Waite-Smith, also called the Waite-Smith. When we talk about modern day tarot reading, most readers and most decks come from basically 4 schools of tarot thought. I personally do work with all of them. I work with Thoth the least, but I do work with all of these. The most common you can see on the screen is the Rider-Waite-Smith. It was largely made famous in the 80s by the works of Mary K. Greer and Rachel Pollack, who are 2 really fantastic tarot writers. They, a lot of my work is saying, what if this, but also we continue to work to make it more inclusive. So that is a lot of what it is. They really combined what the Golden Dawn did, what the Tarot de Marseille did. They really combined that with Jungian framework, Carl Jung, the famous psychologist. And that really is sort of how most people think about tarot today. Most decks are based on Rider-Waite-Smith decks. The Marseille Tarot, or the Tarot de Marseille, less common among modern readers, but it is having a little bit of a resurgence right now. This was largely 17th and 18th century. It was largely popular in France, but it is decorated as if it is meant to be an Italian deck. You'll know that you're reading with a Marseille, most likely because in a second, we're going to break down the different types of tarot cards, but one type are called the pips. And those are the numbered cards 1 through 10. of any of the suits. So your deck probably says like cups, wands, and we'll talk about what all that means in a moment. But in a Marseille as well as a Thoth, but the Thoth is also very specific, which we'll talk about in a second. But those 1 through 10s of each suit are not going to be fully illustrated. They're going to be really straightforward. Yep, this is a picture of 4 cups. So that's what that looks like. The Thoth is mostly used by people who are very serious about occultism and tarot. This says I don't use the Thoth. It's just not my primary form. There aren't a ton of other decks based on it because it is so specific to Aleister Crowley and Lady Frida Harris's work that they were doing. It was sort of published 1944, 69. There's a lot to do with that, and this isn't a history class, but if you have questions later, I'll answer them to the best of my ability as someone who is not a specialist in that. Then there is what I am calling the modern or 2020 school, though this really started, 2010s. We certainly all had our roots earlier than that. And in the modern thought, there's not a specific deck that it's based on, like with these other schools. Instead, it is people who are artists, who are activists, who are very involved in their communities, who are very involved in modern day spirituality. And we are saying, hey, these structures and these systems that the cards are based on are best used if we deconstruct them and kind of rethink them and think about what that can be today and what that can mean. What you'll notice then is if you get a deck that is created in this school or in this style is that they might rename the suits something different. So instead of cups, you'll have bottles or vessels or bowls. I actually think I have seen bowls. And then the court card names. So there will be some cards that you have that are named things like page, knight, queen, king. And those will very often be renamed to say things like student, traveler, architect, visionary is a deck I really love. That works on that way. They're wanting to honor the root of tarot but still bring it into present day and bring it into a present day that is more welcoming and warm and inclusive. I will say these decks and these books, including my own book, are still very much based on the Rider Waite Smith, but they are intended to kind of reinvent. Many of them are not. There are a few people going totally off book, inventing totally new things, and that is really cool. So that is sort of some more background on what tarot is and some of the way to tell the difference between your decks. What tarot is not is a perfect crystal ball. We give the disclaimer that tarot is for entertainment purpose only. A lot of why we give that is because people come in and they want hard, firm answers, but everyone has free will. If you get a reading about a friendship or a relationship, that person could change their mind tomorrow, and a reader can't be expected to account for that free will. The world is extremely unpredictable right now. It is changing intensely, dramatically every day. And so while I do personally believe that the tarot can see and help you prep for a fair amount of that, there's an amount that is just like unprecedented. And so there's no way to account for it. So like anything else, it does have its strengths and its weaknesses. One thing that is not necessarily a strength or a weakness is that it's just a fact. How you read tarot is going to be different per person. So in a couple more bullet points on my syllabus, I'm going to get to how to read tarot cards, which I'm sure is what most people are most excited about. But know that if I say like, oh, well, a 2 is this or a cups is this, and you read it totally differently, you're not doing it wrong. Like that is totally fine. I really push my students to be consistent in their work. That doesn't mean the card is always the same thing because it is going to show up differently in different circumstances, but your work should be rooted, I think is maybe the work I'm looking for. Someone who knows tarot really well and who knows you and how you think should be able to look at that and say, okay, I know how this person got there. And that doesn't mean your intuition won't come through sometimes. It doesn't mean there won't be surprises, but it should still very much be kind of rooted in that. Another weakness of the tarot that I haven't touched on, and this is nothing for any of us to be ashamed of, but it is really limited by the reader's knowledge of the world. It is really limited by our viewpoint. That is not a shortcoming of you. What it does mean is if you read for other people, you want to make sure that you're not reading to make them like dependent on coming to you. I actually encourage most of my clients to see other readers, or I'll say, oh, I have a buddy who specializes in this. You should go say them, or you should go see them. And that is because you don't know what you don't know. If someone comes to me about a very complicated situation at work and they are in medicine, I don't know anything about medicine, at least not from a doctor point of view, only a patient point of view. And so I'm only going to be able to tell them what I know, no matter how much insight I believe the cards have. So that's something I just want you to be aware of as you move forward, because I do think it's disingenuous to say, oh, they can see absolutely everything. Yeah, I'm going to very quickly check the chat before we move on to the next thing. Yeah, so I did have a question. It was just to me, but it said, will I share the slideshow with you for notes later? What I will do is send it to Denise at Woodridge, and it'll get out to you that way, I assume. So let's move on to the next thing, which is actually just shuffling. So if you have a tarot deck with you, and the reason I started putting this in beginner's class is for the same reason I started putting reversals in my beginner's class. And that is that if the syllabus did not have them, people asked about them. And so I tried to get up on it. So when I talk about the best ways to shuffle, please know that there's not anything you can do that is going to like make your cards mad or make them not want to read for you or anything like that. What I am more worried about is the sustainability of your cards, because there are certain ways that are very popular to shuffle that will just wear your cards out a lot faster. They're also more difficult and take more sort of like learned shuffling skill than a lot of people have or need for tarot. So if you have a deck that you've been working with a while, all you really need to do is this. So here's my deck. Pull out some cards, move them around. Pull out some cards, move them around. So you can practice doing that while I'm doing it. That is the way I shuffle most often. When I first get a deck, actually, I'll backtrack and do when I first get a deck in a second. My favorite way to shuffle, I just don't always have the space to do it, is not anything I can show you because of the way my camera is, but basically I take my cards and I just spread them out in a big sloppy pile. And then I just keep kind of swirling them and moving them around. And then I just kind of put them back together into a pile from there. That is also sustainable, not going to damage your cards very much. Not going to make them crack or anything unless you get a little too ambitious when you're swirling them around. Yeah, when I first get a deck, I do what most people want to do all the time, which is the bridge shuffle, which is, if you know cards at all, it's like that one that you're doing to make them fold or bend together. I'm going to be really honest. A weakness of mine is that I still do that way too often. But because of that, a lot of my decks, especially the ones I've had for years and years, look extremely well loved. And I can often tell what the card is before I pull it because of that. So that's something that we want to avoid if possible. But again, nothing bad is going to happen if you do that, other than it's going to wear out your cards. I like to demystify tarot. While I do think it is a really cool skill that will make you really stand out in a lot of ways, there's a lot that people are afraid of that you don't need to be. The deck can't like make anything bad happen or anything like that. The deck isn't gonna get mad at you. Yeah, so just know that. And then the other way to shuffle when you first get a deck, if you're a little too worried about bridge shuffling, not all tarot decks are created equal in terms of the quality of the like cardstock it's on. So it definitely sometimes will behoove you, instead of doing that bridge shuffle a few times, to make like several piles, like put 1, 1, 1, 1, kind of until you have like 7 to 10 piles, and then you can kind of mix them together from there. So that is my super brief shuffling bit. Again, if there are questions, I will make sure to get to them at the end. Now let's talk about reading tarot before. Cool. So Denise is gonna get that out to everybody. So that is what I was checking. That being the slideshow. So let's talk about how to read a tarot card, even if you know nothing about tarot. The first thing I want everyone to do, whether your cards are shuffled or not, is to just kind of spread your cards out a little, pull one card from around the middle. And then if you have a paper, a pen, or you're taking notes on computer or whatever, just start. I'm going to give you 1 minute. Just write down absolutely everything that you notice about this card. For example, I got this Knight of Coins. I am using tonight, it's almost Halloween and I wanted to have fun. So I'm using the Raven's Prophecy Tarot by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the King of Coins. Yep. And it's a picture of a rose, a single rose. It's very thorny. So for my exercise, I would write big red rose, red thorns, long stem. I might even write the word king. I might even write the word coins. And then because you'll have a full minute, I would then go on to describe like some of the colors and the shading, and how it stands out or not against this very dark background. So don't worry at all about reading it or understanding what it means yet. I just want you to get yourself a list of what is going on in that card. 1 minute and go.
And if you don't have a deck with you, and hopefully you can see me, I will hold up a card that I just pulled over here, which the 7 of Discs. So already we're getting into different suits.
But don't worry about that yet. We'll break that down
Yeah.
in just a moment. All right, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about reading those symbols. And then I'm actually going to backtrack. I skipped a thing, and it is actually good that Denise said if you don't have a deck, because I want to talk about how to pick out a deck briefly, but I want to get through this part first. I apologize for that. So the next thing you're going to want to do, but I don't expect you to know how to do this yet, is figure out what each of those symbols or ideas that you pulled from the cards means to you. And there's several different ways that you can do that. You can get books and learn about color correspondences. You can get books and learn about symbolism, certainly about animal and plant messages. So that is so that kind of book learning, you can Google, you can say, what do roses represent? I usually add the words magically or in tarot, just so I have a clear guideline for what I'm looking for. You can also just use critical thinking, sort of chain of thought. So with this rose, I think, okay, to me, when I think roses, I think love. When I think this really red, I actually see a lot of like depth of that. They also always seem sad to me. And those personal note, and I can't explain why, but that personal association is still really important. And so just kind of pulling out what it represents to you, and that includes moods, feelings, energies, experiences that you have had that maybe are more unique. Any of that is going to be really good to look at. I would say, okay, the thorns on roses represent that for every beautiful thing. There's a hard part of it, a difficult piece. Thorns lead me to think about blood. Well, what does blood mean to me? So, that's sort of what we're talking about when we talk about doing it via critical thinking and chain of thought. Some things to just kind of crack tarot overall for you. If you have a more traditional deck, or even not, anything indicating royalty, that's usually something that makes people stumble. So you might see someone in a cape or with a crown, and you're like, oh, what does that mean? Anything like that is indicating royalty, and royalty is sort of a symbol for victory, sovereignty, luxury. But again, make it personal. To me, as someone who does the work that I do with the tarot, if I see royalty, I'm just as likely to think, oh, someone who's in charge, someone who's on a high horse, someone who thinks very highly of themselves. So again, those personal associations are really important. So the next thing I want you to look at, actually, let's do 1 minute of you just pick 2 or 3 of those symbols or ideas or colors that you noticed. And when you watch the recording later, you can certainly pause for longer than a minute if you want to give yourself more time. I'm just trying to be respectful tonight. So, yeah, 1 minute, pick 2 or 3 of those things and just think, what do these mean to me that might show up in a little tarot reading? And go. And I'll actually hold my rose up again for anyone who maybe wants to play with that, since I did talk about it so much. If you don't have your own deck. All right. So the next part of, and sort of the final part of how to read a tarot card when you know nothing about reading a tarot card, is to look at the action that is happening on your card and to think about how to translate that action to an action you can take, or advice, or if you're not using it for advice, or if you're doing a spread and it's not an advice placement, what does this action tell you about the momentum of the situation? So, for example, this King of Coins that we're working with is very still in the moment. There's not a lot of action. So then I would think about, well, what action do roses make normally? There is the action of it going from a bud to a full blossom, it kind of opening up like that. And then if I want to, get dark this close to Halloween, I can think, well, after that, it blooms for a while and it's beautiful. The sun beats down on it, it weathers, rain and storms. But then eventually it does sort of close up, it does shrivel up, it does get really like crackly, and dies. And so that's some of the action I would think about there. Another example, if you have a deck with people, that's actually going to be a little bit easier for you. So because there's always implied action with people. It is, oh, this person was digging in the earth, but is taking a break. And so the action is taking a break. And so what you think then is, this could be a message that I need to take a break, or if I've taken a break for too long, it could be telling me to keep on digging, like get back to it. So it's up to you, but take just one moment and look at what is the action, or what could be the implied action, And how does that translate to a message that might come from tarot? And remember, it is really my job tonight to empower you to kind of figure that out for yourself. So trust your own gut. And if there are questions later, feel free to ask. 1 minute for that action piece and go. All right. So in just a moment, we're going to go into specifically what do the different types of cards mean. Excuse me. For now, if you're still very new or you're still figuring out what deck you even want to work with, I have just a couple super quick things to say about how to pick a deck. The first thing I will say is it is okay to just get whatever deck you like. What art appeals to you? What is exciting to you? What deck is going to make you want to work with it? I really do not go in for deck snobbery at all. I think that every deck creator has a reason for creating that deck. And so the second thing I would say is if you're attracted to a deck for any reason, make sure that you connect with the reason that the deck was created. So sometimes that's really simple. If I have a deck I love called the Crow Tarot, it was created as a celebration of crows and crow messengers. I love crows and crow messengers, so I was like, great, this is a good deck for me. Occasionally, though, I'll see one whose politics or ideas I just don't think I would be happy reading with. And it's not a judgment statement at all to say, oh, I don't think this is for me, but the art is cool. That just is how it is sometimes. Just like my work isn't for everyone, and that's okay. But the next thing I would look at is, okay, you might think the art is really cool, but do you understand what's happening in the art? Can you break down those symbols? Can you figure out what the story or implied action is? So that's the next thing to look for. And the final thing I will say, check to see if it has a guidebook and a guidebook that you like. I am a huge fan of the little white books that come with most decks, because I want nothing more than for emerging readers to have their own stuff to just persistently add to it and kind of grow from there. That being said, some of my favorite decks, what I love so much about them is the guidebook. There is a deck called the Mermaid Tarot by Lisa Robertson. Unreal guidebook, things I have, and I did not expect it because I just like, oh, pretty mermaids, I love it. But the guidebook looks at the cards in ways I, after reading for a decade and a half, had still never even thought about. So having a good guidebook that you can rely on until you feel like you can go off book is the next thing that is going to be really good for you. So that's all I really think it is. It's one of those things that gets over analyzed or overthought. People get really nervous about it. Again, you cannot make the cards mad or not want to work with you. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to get a deck that you actually don't love. And you're like, whoops, guess when I have more money, I need to get another deck. You can still work with that one in the meantime. Not a big deal. So just know that. And, and of course, there's going to be decks you work better with than others, but to learn on, they're pretty much all with understandable art and an understandable guidebook. They're pretty much all going to get you there. So just know that and be confident in that and in your choice. So if anyone was taking notes on that, I'm going to give you a second to finish while I sip my water. And now we are going to get into the types of cards. So everyone take just a second to pull out some different types of cards in your deck. So look at them. And so, for example, I have one here that says Two of Coins, one here that says the Emperor, one here that says Ace of Cups, Queen of Wands. I'm going to very briefly look for the feathers. They're not wanting to show themselves to me tonight. Maybe that means something. Oh, here we go. It's actually swords. Okay. So you should have 5 types to start. We'll talk about a 6th type in a second, but and it doesn't matter what they are. I just want you to have something to look at while you're doing that. And if you couldn't get them all out, it's okay to go through as I am doing this. So with that in mind, let's jump in. The major arcana is whatever card you pulled that just has words on it that does not seem to have a specific suit. So it does not say Queen of Wands, Ace of Cups, Two of Coins. It simply says the Emperor, Death, the High Priestess, something like that. These cards go 0 through 21. The first one is the Fool, and that is number 0. The last one is the World, and that is number 21. And so they will have just like those numbers to them. So knowing that, the major arcana correlate to spirit, and spirit is big life events. It's messages from outside of yourself. It's where you are in your life cycle. If you're just like, hey, I know this is part of my like soul purpose for being here. How am I doing? Where am I? It's most likely a major that's going to tell you that. This is also big existential questions like, what is my soul purpose? What am I here doing? And then it's the biggest lessons we are tasked to learn. All of the cards have lessons for us to learn. I always say that the majors are like the ones that's probably going to take us several years to most of our life to learn. So for me, that has been about boundaries with other people. And then now I'm in a cycle of, oh, am I ever going to feel like I have enough? Just to kind of show you what kind of guidance the majors give. So one thing that we get into later is numerology of the tarot. And I will say this about the majors, they do follow that numerology. And also when you have time, this is normally in a like 3-hour beginner's class. This is something I make people take time to do. We just don't have that tonight, but lay out your cards in order 0 to 21. And they kind of tell a story. It goes from, oh, this fool is embarking on a journey. Then they meet the magician, and really kind of see for yourself what happens. What's interesting about reading the major arcana that way is obviously when you pull like the Emperor, you're not going to say, well, in this story, the Empress means this and the next card means this. So you do have to also learn how to pull it out like and think quickly. But again, while you're learning, seeing how they connect, seeing the kind of stories they tell, and seeing what themes overlap is going to be really, really valuable to your experience. The next one that I have listed is the Wands. These correlate to fire. The rest of the suits all go 1 through 10. And then the court cards, which are very often Page, Knight, Queen, King. If you're using Thoth, they are Prince, Princess, Queen, Knight usually. And then if you're using sort of that more modern style, they could be any number of things, but it will be a title and not a number of the suit. So yeah, wands correlate to fire most often. Again, in Marseille and Thoth, it's the elemental is flipped. So it would be air. Don't worry about that for now, but just know that if you are working with a deck like that. Wands is passion and excitement. It's what gets our motor revving. It's what gets us up in the morning. It's also action, speed, movement, fight, gut instinct. And when we say fight, we don't necessarily mean conflict, although that does come up in this suit. But I mean like the fight of us, like when we are gonna like oh, I don't feel good, but I'm going to fight through it. Or, oh, this person told me I wouldn't succeed at this and I'm going to prove them wrong. Like that's what we're talking about when we say that. I know this is really fast, and that's part of why I'm really excited that this is going to go out to all of you. The swords correlate to air again most often. And that means that they connect to intellect, to knowledge, to institutions. If you're looking at your cards and you're kind of looking at your swords, you're most likely going to notice that some of these look painful, right? They look not fun. That's because with institutions does sometimes come the harm that institutions or systems that don't fit everybody, the harm that is caused there, and that harm's effect on us. Swords are also coming back into sort of the happier side. Communications, decisions. The swords want you to move quickly, but with a clear mind. They are also discernment. So that kind of connects to intellect, but it's knowing the difference between stuff, knowing what's real and not, being able to kind of get to the heart of the matter and let the things that don't matter flitter away. This is also the science and technology card. I get a lot of clients who are like, I'm a very logical person, so I don't know how I'm going to feel about this. And I'm always like, hello, friend. Yes, there is an entire suit that you are just going to love that talks about science and technological advances. So that is what we have there. That is a really good question that I will just make sure I come back to that at the end, Harriet. Cool. The next one is cups. The cups correlate to water. So water is what cups and water are: emotion, relationship, journey, fluidity. When I said fluidity here, I kind of mean like how things flow, or the idea that as people, we are dynamic, we are not static. So it is like essentially our right to change our minds about stuff and our right to feel like this about something 1 minute and then not so much the next minute. And that still feels very harsh and firm and not quite what I'm trying to say, but it's all of the space in between that, right? Too. It's like all of the space between the polarities and binaries that so often kind of define life in society. Cups are also heart's desire. Cups move non-linearly, so there will be some cards that are sort of like oriented at memories or dream sequences or something like that. Desire is intuition. And what I mean by that is understanding that the things that you want are telling you something about yourself. It is not just you being selfish. It is not just you wanting something. It is telling you something about who you want to be as a person or who you are as a person. And it is telling you just to do what you want and not to overthink it or overdo it. These cards also represent art, beauty, love, and love of life. I mentioned that the relationship that is of all types, so friends, family, coworkers. I think the way to say that better sometimes is that cups correlate to the company we keep and what those relationships look like for ourselves. So next up is the pentacles. Pentacles correlate to earth. That is steadfastness, stability. Cups are kind of that relationship with the company we keep, but pentacles are kind of community itself as a larger concept. It's how we make our way in the world. That means it's our life's work. It's that part of life that is bit by bit, step by step, that wants you to really root and grow and thrive, but understand that that happens like one moment, one piece, one thing at a time. It is sometimes, but not always, money, home, and career. I think that there is sometimes a very definitive focus on those things in this suit, and they absolutely represent those things. That is why I consult the tarot a lot for my own personal use. But I think we really limit ourselves when we think of it in those like three very like specific things. So they do represent that, and they represent so much more also. The final type I want to talk about is the court cards of these suits. So the ace through 10, or also kind of tell their own story, and we'll look at that in a minute. But there are other cards you have that are page, knight, queen, king. Because of all of the beautiful modern interpretations of the court cards, it's actually gotten a little bit more difficult to teach court cards in a class like this that is shorter. So what I did want to share tonight is the way to read court cards is think about what the title does to you. So in a traditional deck, the page, okay, well, I know from my tarot studies that pages are messengers. When I think about medieval pages, I think about like, you know, squires who are wanting to learn, who are taking notes during meetings, things like that. Knights are travelers and fighters. Something just to know, the queen and king. The way I most often read them, I don't think this is later in the slideshow at all, but I most often read queens as the internalization of the suit. So I have learned what Pentacles needed to teach me, and I am embodying that. And then the king I read is sort of the externalization of that. So now I am ready to share that with other people. Another way to read these is the page is the starter energy of that suit and tells you where you are in the suit. So Page of Cups says, all right, you're just now figuring out your emotions about this. The Knight says, okay, now you're kind of fighting your emotions. And the Queen says, okay, you've grown a little bit more, you've expanded a little bit more into those emotions. And then the King is like peak emotions about the cups. So that's another way to read them. The way I most often read them is that they are different faces of ourselves. And people want me to say phases there, but I do believe that all 16 court cards are present in us at all times. So think about who brings that out in you. These certainly can be others, but it is often how others show up to remind us of who we are. So a Page of Wands might be someone in my life who is like bright and fun and fiery and young and new on their path, and remind me that maybe I need to bring a little bit of that optimism and joy back to the things I'm passionate about. So that is my super brief court cards thing as they correlate to suits. So the next thing we're going to get into is the numerology of the tarot. These are the examples and the numerological framework that I personally use. They shift a bit reader to reader. Your homework leading here, in addition to laying out all your majors and looking at that larger story, is to take out like all of your ones and look at what do I think they have in common? What do I think that my aces represent to me? What do I think all of the twos in my deck represent to me? That is one of my favorite activities to do when I get a new deck, because it is going to be a little bit different deck to deck as well. So I put ones on this list. It's most often called aces. I don't know why I did that. I'm blaming the head cold I had when I made this slideshow. But aces are external opportunity. They are news. They are newness. Yeah, twos represent balance or center. Another thing they can represent is someone or something like a project that is an even match for you. Threes represent partnership, group work. They also represent some of that Pentacles bit by bit energy, one thing at a time. For fours, I read them as harmony, concordance, stability. I put this on here because it's so common. I don't always read them this way, but they very often can be about reevaluation. So that's why I said kind of pull all of yours to look at and see what makes sense for you. And then the fives, if you ever look at your deck, just kind of look at all the cards, you'll notice that none of your fives look very happy. That's because they do tend to represent conflict, pain, heartbreak. The tarot really wants you to have a wonderful, incredible, fulfilling life. Life is still life, and there's still going to be harder stuff, and a lot of times that shows up in the fives. The sixes I read as how we pick ourselves up or heal after a heartache or conflict. Again, the cards do tell a little bit of a story from card to card. And so here we have this idea of there was a fight or there was a heartache. The next piece of the story is how do you heal? How do you pick yourself up after that? The sevens then are the planting of new seeds, the what comes next. We've picked ourselves up. What now? And we get to decide that, right? That's like an empowering number to have. It's also empowering because if you study some deeper history, of tarot and you start looking at some of the of occultism that informed it, sevens are actually considered like a holy number, and like you absolutely don't have to believe any of that. It is just in a lot of the tarot decks, and I think it is why the sevens kind of shake out like that. The eights to me represent that time, sometime after the seeds are planted, but they're not quite ready for harvest. So what does that mean in a reading? Well, these are the cards that show us what we can learn in the in-between times. And they often mark a transition or change that is not as dramatic as like a whole new chapter of your life or a whole new book in the series of your life. But think more of when you're reading a book, that moment where the narrator's perspective changes or shifts. It's kind of more that moment. It is more internal, although certainly in storytelling as well as a tarot reading that can have like a practical, physical manifestation. Nines are completion, at least how I read them. As we near the end of the suit, knowing that things are going to finish soon, what lessons have we been putting off and refusing to learn? What tasks have we been putting off until the last minute and refusing to do? What successes or failures are imminent? How can we be prepared? How can we be present, and mind that what is about to happen is about to happen? It's also just letting us know that we're nearing the end of a cycle. And so whatever that means to you, be prepared for it. The tens represent transformation when I read. So I see transformation as how have the messages of this suit and how have the other cards in this reading changed me? How have they made me see something differently? How have they walked me through a journey that I have been different at the end of? And then when they've changed me, how have they empowered me to help create beautiful change in the world wherever I am? That's a very dramatic last sentence, so do not worry quite so much about hitting it that hard, but it's something to say, well, okay, now that I've changed, what do I do with that change is another way to say that. So, like I said, I am going to make sure this gets out to you all. Yeah, the next thing I want to do, I want everyone to take like 1.5 minutes to look over the notes that they took, because we're going to do some practice just with what I've taught you in a moment. And I know that it's going to be annoying to look through all of your notes really fast. So this is a way to kind of synthesize information. I think that sort of synthesis break is so important when you're learning something new. So 90 seconds is not a lot to synthesize this much information. I apologize for that, but it's what we got. So take 90 seconds, look over your notes. And in this 90 seconds, if you're like, oh, this makes me think of this, write it down to use in your own readings, which we'll do in just a second. And go. All right, everyone. So one more thing I want to touch on before we have some sort of active practice is reversals. This is another thing that sounds scary and could probably be its own class, but I also just have some sound bites for this class. And so with reversals, a reversal, if you don't know, if you hear that word and you're like, I don't even know what Cassandra is talking about, that's okay. It just means you pull a card and it is upside down. And so you can kind of see here my words are on the top and upside down when they should be on the bottom and right side up. So some people read these and think, oh, that must mean the opposite. And you'll even see tons of otherwise really good tarot books that will tell you it means the opposite. That always felt a little bit weird to me and a little bit limiting to me because not everything has a total opposite, or not everything has an opposite that would like make sense to show up in a reading. And so much of the tarot is about learning big life lessons. And so the opposite of that is like, don't learn the lesson. Like, that's weird to me. So if it makes sense to you to learn the opposite, so for example, this emperor that I pulled, I read this card, as do many other readers, to be a card about, self-discipline, sticking to regimens, etc. I would look at this and upside down or reverse and say, okay, so this is about cutting loose. This is about not necessarily being so strict on myself. This card is a good example of how to read opposite in a reversal. So I'm glad that that's the one I pulled, because it definitely can be done. You just will run into trouble with some of them. So the way I most often read it is either as an energy or a message that is blocked. So, okay, I'm supposed to be really self-disciplined right now, but I'm not. And I'm having trouble accessing that energy. And the cards are just affirming for me, yes, there is something preventing you from accessing that energy of self-discipline. You will most likely need to pull a clarifying card in this case, although sometimes not. Sometimes just recognizing that there is a block there is all you need. And certainly for me, with self-discipline specifically, it is true that if I'm like, okay, no, I'm supposed to be doing this, it's easier for me to pull it up and pull it together. The way I most often read it is that it is an energy or message or messenger that is show opportunity. That's another good word to use for any tarot card in any position. The way, yeah, how do I want to say this? It's energy or whatever that is showing up, but a lot differently than I thought it was going to. So, okay, I am being disciplined right now, but it doesn't look like working myself to the bone. It also looks like knowing when I need to pause and eat, knowing when I need to stop and remember to take my meds or whatever. So, or it's showing up as something totally different. But yeah, that's how I most often read those, is just, okay, this energy is here, this message is present, but it looks very different than what I was expecting. And then the message is usually to just sit with that message. Don't keep pulling cards about it, kind of sit with that and figure out where to go from there. Cool. My next slide. These are the ways I really like to tell people you will most often read tarot, although certainly you could have a bunch of other ways that it shows up. So we're going to practice reading our cards for like 2-3 minutes in just a moment. But I want you to ask yourself, pull a card and say, okay, I'm going to pull a card. And then if it's a person, who would that person in my life be? If it's a face of myself, what face is that? Who, and who am I with when that face shows up? What am I doing? If it's an event in your life, and events in your life can be common, it can be going to the grocery store, or it can be life altering. It can be like when I moved to the Midwest from the Bible Belt, something like that. But just what event is the card? And then if this card is advice, what advice is that and how can I use it? And then a mood or energy. What mood or energy is it? So the reason I want people to be able to read all of these is not only so you can pull a single card and answer a question, but I think you'll be a lot less tempted to when you do a spread, and we'll talk about spreads after this activity or after this practice. But you know, a spread placement, it is going to look different in every placement, and you still should know how to read it. I'm going to give you two different examples. I'm just going to pull two cards just so you kind of get the idea. A lot of times when people hear me say this, what they hear initially is, oh no, I need to come up with, what is that, 5 radically different interpretations of this card. That's not true at all. It can be really simple. So I got the Ace of Coins, should most likely be Ace of Pentacles. So let's just take the simplest form of this. This is news, good news about stability that is coming to you. So as a person, this might be the person offering me an opportunity for stability, or it might be me who has worked really hard and has finally gotten what I wanted out of that. If it's a face of myself, it might actually be the face of me that does things like this, that shows up, showing other people, teaching other people a skill that might help them create their own stability, or at least look for it in the cards. Another face of myself it might be is just when I'm able to hire people to help me with something, or when I'm out in I do, you know, some volunteering and stuff in my community. So it might be that face of myself, which is like cheerful and boundaried, but still very warm and open. As an event in my life, this would obviously be the opportunity for stability. As advice, it would be saying, what can you do right now that would provide stability? And where can you look for opportunities for stability? And then as a mood or energy, this is just like a mood of newness, right? Because it's that ace, and it's also a mood of just feeling upbeat and positive that stability is going to be just fine. Another example here, I don't want another ace. That was the point of pulling two cards. 9 of Cups. This is a card that is just joyful, beautiful, happy making. As a person, a 9 of Cups is someone who is very happy. As a face of myself, it is the face that knows what I want and is thrilled when I get it. As an event in my life, it is something that brings me a lot of joy. As advice, it's telling me honestly to look for the positive. That's advice I kind of hate, but it does show up in the cards sometimes. Or it's advice telling me to chase my dreams or do some intention setting. And then as a mood or energy, it is just kind of joy, happiness, all of that. So again, take 3 minutes. You can pull a single card and look for all of these, or you can pull different cards if you're pulling. And then I am going to just hold up that Ace of Coins for people who want to think of, who need to think of it along that lines, but do so very differently than what I said. So let me actually give you, what time is it? I'll give you 2 minutes for this. And go. And remember, you're knowing, I'm actually going to pause while I say this, but remember that this activity is calling on that suit and number breakdown that I did, but also that idea of using just the symbols and art that you recognize that means something to you, that personal recall, and doing all of that. And if you get stuck, one of my favorite tips from Tarot Genius, Mary Kay Greer, is to just start saying the stuff out loud. That's another reason I do ask for everyone to be muted, because if I'm just sitting there looking at this, I might not get very far. But when I start out loud being like, okay, as a person, who would a person with 3 leaves sprouting up from the ground with the sun is shining? When I say it out loud, that actually begins to take shape in my mind. So do not be afraid to do that. And now let's resume our 1 minute and 50 seconds. About 20 more seconds. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is what comes next. What do you do after you leave this workshop? And that is a threefold lesson. The first thing we're going to touch on there is I had a question, so it was a twofold question, and then a really good question came in, which is where to buy tarot decks as well. And I'll say tarot books as well, and I'll talk about finding resources as part of this. So you can buy tarot decks, believe it or not, pretty much anywhere that you can buy books. Most bookstores have them, and you can buy them, excuse me, if you live near any kind of metaphysical store, or like any store that's like kind of witchy, anything like that. And again, you don't necessarily have to believe other stuff that is going on in the store, but that is just kind of where to get them. Some gift shops have them. I live near a small chain, and I'm not sure how small it is, so if it's elsewhere, but called Patina, that's literally a gift shop, but they have even some of the like trendier decks, because tarot is really popular right now, so you'd be surprised where you can buy it. I've seen people say they got their deck at like Urban Outfitters, so obviously don't do a wild like search through the mall to a bunch of stores. You don't know if it's going to be there or not, but you can get them most places. If you really can't, or if you can't find them in where you're living, that's fine. You can definitely get them online. There are basically two kinds of tarot decks. Now there's three. There's like mass-produced decks, medium-produced decks, and independent decks. And the way to get mass-produced decks and most medium-produced decks is through Amazon.com or bookshop.org or something like that. The independent ones, you do have to kind of be in the know. So I would maybe follow some tarot people that you like on social media. And when they post about independent decks, you can look and see if it's still for sale and get it that way. I can tell you some independent decks that I really love that fit in well with what we talked about tonight, that are often for sale or regularly for sale. One of them is called the This Might Hurt Tarot by Isabella Rotman. One of them is called the Numinous Tarot by Cedar McLeod. And I'll actually spell numinous in the chat because that's kind of a weird word. Things like that. And oops, I said that to one person. So yeah, anything like that. Denise did say that a list would be sent out of places near y'all, if you are near Woodbridge, to get Woodridge, sorry. And then yeah, and just kind of find that way. And then some stores are getting better about carrying those independent decks as well. The next thing to do once you have a deck or two or seven that you really love, is to institute a regular tarot practice, practicing the techniques that I taught you here tonight. And a lot of books and readers will tell you that that should look daily. And I think if you have a full-time job or 2 or 3 jobs and kids and community obligations, like that's ridiculous. I don't actually expect you to do that unless it is genuinely beneficial to you to do so. But I would say you decide what regular looks like and then just stick to that as like a show of self-care. Like, I am going to take 30 minutes every Thursday morning to look at my cards, take some notes about them, and see how they kind of fit throughout the week coming up. Or I'm going to do this every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever it ends up being for you. And what you do is you just pull a card or, a couple of cards and take your notes and go from there. I really like when people sit with the tarot cards as well. So it's not just about getting your notes down, but give it, this sounds kind of woo and hokey. But you know, sit with it, give it a, don't immediately jump in and say, two hands, fire, you know, back up, kind of take a couple of those deep breaths or focus on your breathing like we did. Um, and then after that moment of really just focusing on that image, then start kind of taking your notes. If you do that, what those symbols or what that action means to you are going to look very different and be a lot less stressful to try to come up with than if you try to just rush into it. So that's the other thing I suggest. The other thing I suggest is practicing on your friends. I know that can be really scary for the first time, but you don't have to make a big thing about it. If a friend is coming to you advice, just say, hey, I know this might not be your thing, unless you know it is their thing, in which case, by all means. I know this might not be your thing, but I'm learning tarot. Before I tell you what I think, is it okay if I pull a card and see what it says? And so you can do that. You also can immediately, when you leave here tonight, begin using spreads, which is any assortment of any number of cards. What makes it a spread and not just a bunch of cards is that the spreads will have specific placements. So one spread I want to tell you about before we go tonight is the past, present, future spread. And it's just what it sounds like, a card that represents your past, a card that represents your present, and a card that represents what's coming up in the future. So how, you know, and it's not just about telling you, because you already know what's in your past, you already know what's in the present. But the present is about kind of seeing it clearly, getting like a snapshot or a bird's eye view, something like that. And the past is letting you know what habits, patterns, cycles from the past are repeating and making things difficult for you now. Or what positive lessons or people or events from your past should you be calling on now? So that's a past, present, future spread. So another great way to learn is just when you have some questions or problems, pull a short spread. I think when you're learning, the spread should be between 1 and 5 cards. I really don't want you to overcomplicate it for yourself. I'll tell you a couple more spreads in a moment. But I want to talk real quick about, I know I'm super low on time, but about reading spreads and how to do that. So you lay out your cards. Let's say we did this past, present, future spread. And the first thing you do is you take that step back that I talked about and you kind of look at, okay, together, what is the general, like, again, this is such a like hokey sounding statement, but like, what is the general like vibe coming off of these cards? Like, what does that look like? What does it feel like in my body as I'm sitting here with these cards? And if you have an upbringing that said that like tarot is bad, don't do tarot, all of your readings might feel scary at first. So like if that is the case, just, you know yourself, try to push past that. But for the most part, really try to kind of like, okay, how does this feel in my body? How does this sit in my heart and my mind? And then look at the story unfolding in the spread. When I taught you about how the majors tell a whole story, the reason I have students in longer classes learn that is because it comes up again in spreads. The story originates at the first card you laid down. So with this one, it's our past. And so even though the present is the one in the center, and it might be the most important part and the one we want to zoom in on, the story starts with the past, and it's really important to note that. And so, what is happening? What is the activity on that card? How does that shift or change and get you to the action or activity of the next card? And so on and so forth. Another thing I will say about spreads is after you look at that energy, that movement, take some notes or at least say out loud to yourself, like, okay, so the story of this reading, the story of this answer to this question is this. And then look at the cards sort of individually to see, are there any keywords that repeat? Are there any symbols that repeat? Are there any ideas or lessons that repeat? anything like that. I also, if you're doing 3 or more cards, or you're doing a reading where you would expect certain cards and don't get them, I would note anything that is missing. I very often will read what's not there. An example is a client says, my partner and I are just not getting along. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to expect to get a lot of wands, which are that fire piece, because that's so much what we think of with like conflict. And I would expect to get a lot of cups because this is a relationship. If I were to pull, say, almost all swords or pentacles, I would say, well, here's the problem. This is a relationship, a living emotional thing, and you're being completely logical about it instead of answering to your heart. So that's an example of that. The flip side of that being someone says, I'm trying to make a business plan and it's not coming together. And it's every step of the plan that I try to do is not working the way that it should. If you get all wands or cups, I'm going to feel like, and I would be way more polite than this to a real client, but I'm going to feel like, well, of course it's not coming together. You're not putting any logical or any actual like doable steps that build on each other in here. You're just rushing in with this fiery energy and expecting your love of your business to carry you through. And so that's an example of why we read what's missing. From there, you then break down and look at, okay, so this is what's in the past. This is what's in the present. This is what's coming up to anticipate in the future. And if that's sort of a positively aspected card in the future, you're like, great, I'm learning my lessons. We're golden. I just got to stay on track. If it's a negatively aspected card, then you want to really keep digging in those first two to break some of those cycles or habits that you're dealing with. So that is the spread I wanted to use for the example of how to read a spread. There are a couple more that I think are good for beginners, and then we'll open up for Q&A. One of them is called a mind, body, spirit spread, and that is, again, very simple. I like these 3 card ones for people who are learning because it's very just quick and succinct. But the mind placement basically says what's on your mind. How is your intellect processing things in your life right now? The body is like, what is my body trying to tell me? And I have seen that be so literal. I one time got cards with a bunch of fruit and I was like, okay, you're right. I am a little bit dehydrated and malnourished lately. So it can be super literal, like it can also be like, you know, a message from your body or something like that. And then spirit, again, that doesn't mean you have to ascribe to any specific spiritual beliefs, but that sort of other part of you that like is emotional, is out there doing your work in the world, like what you put into the soul piece, I guess is what I want to say. With that, it's basically saying like, okay, well, what does that side of me say? What does that side have for me? And then also like that is the part of us that is like out in the world doing our work. And so what work should we be doing? How can it guide you? That's kind of what you're looking at in the spirit placement. So again, that was past, present, future, mind, body, spirit. Another one that I think is so good when you're learning to do for your regular practice, or if you start a daily practice, is to pull a single card that tells you what the energy of the day is. And then one more card that tells you what your advice is for the day. It's always fun to me to see how people expand on that too when they want to learn like the ways that are on the screen right now. So I've seen students come back to me like on social media and say, oh, I did the energy advice spread, but I wanted to practice. So then I said, ooh, who am I going to have an important interaction with today? And I pulled a card, or, you know, specifically what's going to happen, and pulled an event card. So it's fun, definitely fun to play with, but it's definitely okay to start with just energy and advice for now. So that's what I got, y'all. I packed a lot of information into 90 minutes. So hopefully you were able to get it. I'm going to open up for Q&A. And while I wait for Q&A answers to come into the chat box, I'm going to sit back and drink some water. You were all really wonderful. The questions that asked were either thoughtful or because I did miss something. So thank you for that. And do not be shy about questions. This is a class that I intended to be for total beginners. You know, in another class, I might not talk about where to buy decks or if I read with reversals or something like that, or how to shuffle. So I know that you really might not know stuff, and that is okay. I wish that I had known of a class where I could go and ask literally anything I wanted when I was thinking about picking this up. So, and it can also be a deeper, more complicated question if you have been reading for a little while and just wanted to see what I had to say. I'm here for all of that. So with that, let's do it. Q&A. While I wait, I do see there's someone in there now. I'm gonna see if a couple come in. And I also already started the slide, so I'll just say this before I get to questions. This slide is labeled "Don't be a stranger." So basically it's the how to keep in touch with me. My website is cassandra-snow.com, and that really is your one-stop shop for my books, other classes, my blogs, which are like tarot informative. So that is there. I do have a Patreon that is very much through my sort of like radical queer lens, but I do a lot of tarot and honestly witchcraft writing there. My Instagram, Tarot Cassandra, true hodgepodge of things. But many of them are tarot centric. I also will post a lot of independent decks and do deck reviews if that's something people were interested in as well. If you must follow me on Twitter and TikTok, that's where you can do that. Tarot-Cassandra, or sorry, _ the reason I say that is because Twitter is sometimes where I type important things and sometimes where I'm when I'm just sad and want to shout into the void. And I do not know what I am doing on TikTok. I've got some up that are kind of funny, I think. So yes, preferred is my website, my Patreon, and my Instagram. Is sort of my joke, but actually though, if you must follow me at Twitter and TikTok to keep in touch, then that is how you can do that. So, thank you very much, Miranda. I won't read that out loud, but it's very sweet. Stephanie says, how did you get into tarot? That is a really good question. Yeah, I think it is so different for everyone, and I love hearing people's stories. I was only 18. I'm 36 now. And so when I was 18, I had a really colossally horrible freshman year in college. Just almost anything you can name that is terrible to happen to someone happened to me that year. And then on top of it, some stuff you couldn't name happened. And so I was raised in the Bible Belt, and I was taught growing up that tarot cards are scary or bad. And I really tried to be open when I went to college, just see what other people had to say. But at the same time, stuff was happening to me, and that was bad. And I wanted answers from something that was different than what I'd been raised in, because those things were not giving me the affirmation that I wanted. They were not giving me the answers that I wanted. You know, sometimes I did want a concrete answer, which the tarot can deliver. And honestly too, it was a really hard year, and I still stayed on my studies, stayed on, you know, and so I wanted to do something that was fun and that wasn't school or work or trauma related. And so it was kind of an outlet for that, just to give my brain something to do, some art to play with, that kind of thing. So that's sort of a version of how I got into this. I will also say I was considered highly intuitive my whole life. And I also thought of when I got into a dorm room setting, that was kind of a lot for me. It was really intense trying to be there for everyone and just being around so many different people. And tarot gave me a way to kind of channel that natural intuition into like something tangible. So I could pull out my cards and say, hey, I have my cards. You can tell me whatever you want, cards. And then when I put them up, the time for that is done and I need to focus on school. And so it was cool to have that as well, that kind of specific outlet for that. I got into it too. A friend, the very first time, a friend handed me a novelty deck that I actually didn't know I still had, but I do. So that's really fun and exciting. My person showed it to me several weeks ago and was like, hey, did you know we had this? And I was like, oh no, not my first deck ever. So that was really fun. And then I was just lucky to know people who were into it, who could tell me stuff. So yeah, that is that answer. And then how long did it take before I felt comfortable giving readings? So I have two different answers for this. One is that in the beginning, when I was learning, I was very hungry to share this with people. I was like the annoying friend who wanted, like, we'd be at lunch in the cafeteria and they would be like, oh, I'm so worried about this exam. And I would be like, let me pull cards for it. And that's why I said, like, ask your friends if it's cool if you pull a card, because it can be a lot fast otherwise. And so in the beginning, it was all the time. I did have sort of a falling away from the tarot just because school got too intense and I got very, very sick and I wanted to finish college. And so I didn't touch them for a couple of years just because I didn't have capacity to. When I picked them up again, I did immediately start reading for friends again, friends only, because that's such a good way to practice. And it's the best way to practice, to be in conversation with people about it. I didn't start charging until I got out of school when I was like 23. I don't think I took money for this once until I was 27, 26, I think, because I have been reading for a decade professionally. So yeah, it took a long time. And some of that was comfort with the tarot. Some of it was when I started out doing this in the Bible Belt, I didn't actually understand that people would one day pay me for this. Like, I didn't think that was a thing. So it was literally just something to do in the beginning. And then once I learned I could get paid to do this, I took a couple of years to study really intensely. I read a ton of books. I got a bunch of different decks to look at them. I practiced more seriously with more involved spreads with friends. And then eventually I felt comfortable to take money. It did take an outside influence as well. A friend of mine who's a super successful self-employed writer, copywriter, she said, oh, hey, I really want a tarot reading one day. Do you know anyone? And I was like, I can do that. And then I did it. And she was like, this is what you should be doing. Like, this is like, what are you doing? Like, this is what you need to be doing with your life. And it did take this very successful person giving me that nudge for me to feel confident. For other people to feel confident, I would say